study
around
along
it.
my
It's
PlayStation, and they use my PlayStation. They all say it's their PlayStation.
You play games?
Yeah.
Well, what do you play?
At the moment, I'm playing
Old people games.
old
FIFA?
people games. No.
I play
Sid Meier's
FIFA.
Civilization 6. I'm trying to conquer the world through Salahuddin.
No, I saw you playing Tetris.
Alhamdulillah.
I play Watch Dogs 2
I play Watch Dogs, not you.
and Grand Theft Auto.
You play Grand Theft Auto? I was gonna say mashallah, but I'll restrain that.
What do you play?
I don't even play. I just play FIFA basically. I play with Everton career mode, and I get like all the Saudi money in, and I get all these like Muslim players and start this like Muslim like gun team like Pogba and Mbappe and all that. So that's how I kind of release my frustrations of Muslim clubhouse.
Mbappe is Muslim, bro?
I think so. Yeah, apparently, and Eden Hazard apparently is too. So just get all of them in one team. It makes you feel good as a Muslim. Gives me an iman boost.
Salah and Mane.
Yeah, true. Them as well. But it's Sadi. He went somewhere. Anyways, what we'll do, inshallah.
Sorry, you were saying?
No. So it's interesting because like I'll kind of start it now, inshallah. But
okay, yeah.
If you're all good, but it's interesting because it's approaching. It is like 20 years, post 9/11, and essentially there's been a lot of change, of course, during that time, in many different ways within how the Muslim community were affected on the ground, or when it comes to discourse and dialogue in history as well, in our sort of Australia, and how I guess the government response was. So I think there's a lot to unpack there. And that's why we wanted to have you on as well. So what's your sort of experiences in terms of when 9/11 happened in of itself?
The actual day?
Yeah, the actual day.
Yeah. Are we starting, by the way? Sorry, I didn't know.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry.
Unless you don't want to, I don't know.
No, sure. I didn't know. I was just about to, I was living with still by myself, and got a phone call from a stepbrother, and said turn on the TV, and I could tell by his voice that there was he sounded worried, scared, something, great, amazed. I could tell. And I switched on TV and I couldn't make sense of it. There was this building with a big hole in it. Sorry, I don't mean to be crude or disrespectful, but I didn't understand what it was to begin with. And slowly but surely, as I made sense of it, I found myself whispering, "Oh my God, what have we done?" And I don't know why I said we. I didn't know much then, but about anything. I kind of intuitively knew that it had something to do with me. I don't know, like it was strange, and even though it really didn't, but yeah. So that was, and then the next day, people were crying on the radio. There was a shock. It was 24/7 coverage, and yeah, it was non-stop interpretation. And I think within a day, maybe less than that, because everybody wanted to know who was responsible. Initially, a Palestinian group took responsibility, and then within a day, we saw images of Osama bin Laden shooting AK-47 at a wedding in celebration, and Al Qaeda came into our consciousness, and it changed my life.
It was interesting. You actually, I'll ask Sadi as well. Like, what's been your sort of experience like of that day?
Similar in some ways. I was 16. I was actually watching TV with my brother. People now have corrected me that I couldn't have been watching sports tonight, but it was something after the news, something to do with sports. And then they did a live switch to New York. Oh, a plane has crashed into a building, and we thought, oh, it was probably just an accident or something. And so they just had the camera there, and we're like, what is this thing? When are they going to go back to the program? And then the second plane hit. So we saw that live, second one, which was obviously very frightening. And, I have family in the States. Obviously, the world wasn't nearly as connected as now. Like, there's no instant messaging and things. There was, but, obviously, it's nothing like now. And then I think, the news coverage started. All the channels became US channels, Australian channels, like it was all CNN and so forth. And it was pandemonium. There was more planes. There was a Pentagon one, and then there's the one that crashed in the middle of nowhere. It was a school day the next day. I went to school, and I went to a public school, high school, but it was predominantly Muslim. I actually remember one of my teachers saying, um, uh, I asked her, like, what do you think? And she said, America's getting a taste of its own medicine. Yeah. Um, I don't know. It was, obviously first day, and like I think there was a feeling of, wow, America. Someone has spoken back to America, and obviously it's tragic, and there's nothing to celebrate about it. Thousands of civilians died, innocent people died. Um, but there was that, I don't know how to explain it. Someone has spoken back, in this violent and obviously irrational way to the great Satan. That's the way to put it, really. Like, I know it sounds a bit Iranian, but regime. But it was like that. It was like, like, no, of course this is wrong, but at the same time, like, um, you know, uh, the United States, even in the 90s, had done a lot of damage around the world. Um, the first Gulf War had already happened, um, and so yeah, that was the state. And obviously as the days and weeks passed, things only got worse because I think within the second day, or at the latest, Bush is standing atop ground zero saying they'll soon hear us. And I remember that must mean war. Um, yeah, and then Taliban in recent days have been saying, like news and interviews have emerged from the past where the Taliban was actually gave the United States 6 different options or something like that, to about half a dozen options to deal with Osama, but they wouldn't hear any of it, including, let's take him to the Hague. But apparently they wouldn't hear any of it, and they wanted to go in unilateral action. As they actually, those are the words that being used in the media. Whether or not there's, or was that for Iraq? I can't remember, but um, it was really quick, and it was really violent, and it was really traumatic in every direction. I had lots of Afghan friends, um, friends that whose parents had fled the Taliban regime actually, only in recent years. So it was just all over the place.
You have anything to add to that, Yassir, by any chance?
No, similar. It was late at night, so whether it was sports tonight or after the news, yeah, it was maybe 11 p.m. something. I can't remember, something like that. So interesting that Sadi said. I went online straight away to was it a Merc room? I don't know if this may not make sense to you. IRC, whatever. It was like this chat back in the day. Went to a Muslim room. And,
IRC, did you say?
yeah, something like that.
Yeah. MCQ was it?
Oh, they used to make that annoying noise.
Yeah, that's right. Pre-MSN Messenger, which even that you probably never used, Tanzim.
No, I use Messenger. MSN.
Oh, okay. Yeah, this is pre-MSN.
So very similar. Led to the think it was in October, the US by that stage had gone into Afghanistan. 9 days later, Bush had his State of Union address, and in that State of Union address, effectively started the war on terror. Made a speech about how the terrorists were enemies of Allah. Sheikh Hamza Yusuf was there. Everything was slowly, surely being put into place. It didn't take long.
You know, in the first part, you mentioned when the planes hit the towers, you're like, you know, what did we do? I think that's what you said. Like, you know, what are we doing now? Muslims, you know, what did we do now? Yeah, like you kind of put yourself in that kind of situation, and that's how you sort of viewed the situation, in the sense of as if you're responsible as well. Could you maybe expand on that?
Well, I didn't know anything. I wasn't very political or anything. I didn't know anything about the world at that stage, and we didn't know that it was Muslims. We didn't know it had anything to do with it. It's not like I'd been following the news and realized that the World Trade Center had been attacked once before and there was a rising threat of Al-Qaeda or anything like that. I didn't know that. I knew about Palestine, I knew about Iraq, things like that, but, you know, very surface stuff history. And so it was involuntary. I don't know why. I mean, I guess it was I racialized, or I recognized myself as a threat before I even recognized, or maybe it was some type of apprehension and fear of what was to come. Maybe I knew enough to know that the world that I came from was antagonistic to America, and America was antagonistic to my world. And maybe it was just a guess. I don't know. It just came out, and then I look back and think that eerie sense. It's kind of like a prediction. So it was something like, what have we done? And who is the we? Why am I part of it?
Yeah, that's interesting, because I can sort of relate to that in a little bit, because in some way, because I was like really young, and I remember like a few years later, as I was like in year 2 or something, and my parents, my mom, I had this speech to do from school, and it was sort of like an open topic, and I think at that time it was like 2 years post like 9/11 or something to that effect. And so my mom was like, okay, look, you know, I think it's good time to, like, because you're Muslim, you know, you should kind of explain yourself or something. Back then, you know, you're a little kid, you're just like whatever. But so my whole speech ended up being about why, you know, Muslims are good, and why, you know, 9/11 was bad and Muslims aren't bad people. And so I still remember that. I'm just like, looking back, it's I guess I can sort of chuckle over it, but I guess, like, you know, I can't blame my sort of family in the sense of how they approached that sort of discussions at that time, because it's like naturally, I don't know, like because of the media, or like the Islamophobia they're experiencing, it's like they're sort of on the back foot, and politically speaking, I think a lot more people weren't as aware of how to navigate kind of situations. So it's like that we were kind of put in a corner and having to like sort of explain ourselves in that manner. And I was just a little kid. I was like, yeah, whatever, just go with the flow. But so kind of what I wanted to expand on is also the sort of approach when it comes to the Muslim community, or even our Muslim leaders. It could be post 9/11, or even after that, like you know, a lot more years after 9/11. Like, have you seen a growth in how, I guess, the Muslim community approached I guess the change or the shift in things, or would you say that the politics has relatively stayed the same? Like, has there been like a sort of evolution post 9/11?
If you're asking me or Sadi, but I'll go first.
Yeah.
Okay. There's definitely been a shift and change. Absolutely, we had to learn on the go, man. We made lots of mistakes, obviously, and you can forgive those mistakes. I think when I say we, I'm talking about those who found themselves in leadership positions, or not so much those who sought out leadership positions. You know, initially there was a shock, necessity to distance. Actually, you know what? No, initially there was probably a more robust voice. I remember friends wearing Osama bin Laden t-shirts all of a sudden. You know, I remember people aligning themselves against the US. I mean, what was Bush's famous phrase? You're either with us or against us. And many of us were like, well, we're not with you. So, where does that leave us, right? And maybe that was out of ignorance and not understanding the political environment or the lashing out on, but then majority of people were horrified, majority. And so initially those political messages were more attempt to distance ourselves from the events, and those distances could happen in multiple ways. But there was something like Sadi said, that, well, it could have happened to a nicer country. They've been doing that to everybody. Why not Manhattan if it's Beirut and Baghdad, like, so there was a bit of that, but, and not just from Muslim voices, mind you, so to be clear about that. And then, honestly, you got swept away in the cycle of media because it was 24/7 and there was just constant misinformation and et cetera, et cetera. And slowly but surely, I mean, you have to understand, in the first few days, in the first few weeks, Islam wasn't the debating topic, right? And slowly but surely it became about a version of the deen. It became about how to link Al-Qaeda to the Taliban and how to link the Taliban to Islam. And at that point, we found leaders coming out with a very, very apologetic position. And that was the initial stage. And that lasted for a long, long time. I'm not kidding. People thought that if we apologized enough, if we just said it's not us, that the problem may be resolved that way. What happened in the height of the war on terror that 9/11 instigated was an evolving of Islamophobia, in which we had a hand in that evolution. We fed the media space with too much about Islam. We spoke too much about the deen. We made it too much about being Muslim. It became, for many, many people, a debate about religiosity or levels of religiosity rather than politics or history. And then anytime politics and history was brought up, it came across as us making excuses. So it evolved to the point, we're talking about maybe 10 years later, finally, we get public voices that denounce the apologies. Of course, it happened everywhere in the community, but finally in the media, one of the earliest articles that I can remember was Muhammad Tabaz. It was 2012. He wrote after the quote-unquote riots in Sydney. A defense of the reasons why Muslims may be angry or rioting. Put those in quotation marks because it wasn't a riot. It was one of of my memory, I could be wrong, few occasions that Muslims began publicly saying, no, we're not going to apologize. And politics has changed then and become more complicated. I will say this in a closing comment. September 11 became a bit like an opportunity. It sounds terrible, but it became an opportunity. It created many, many careers. It produced many, many people who never would have come anywhere near the microphone. It made academics and made public speakers, media personalities, comedians. It did the whole lot. It put Muslims in a pedestal. In many ways, we didn't want to be on one, and some of us did. It created a lot of fame hunger, a lot of need for taking up that platform and speaking on the behalf. It wasn't like we had leaders and they just went out there. No, September 11 produced a particular type of leader. And those leaders who wanted, if you will, to stand before the white gaze, the white anxiety and deal with it, because there was privilege in that. There really was. It made careers and it made narratives and it centered Islam. And in centering Islam, it centered a few of our leaders.
It was, mashallah, it was a great breakdown. Might be like three sort of questions, I don't know, but I think you touched on a really good point. So I wanted to ask you three questions in regards to what you just said. One is I guess with the apologetic position, what would that sort of consist of? What does it mean to be apologetic? I think maybe if we can get specifics as well, then I guess it'll be a bit more clearer for the listeners. But do you want me to ask the other two? I can ask the other two, so maybe it connects. But yeah, the second one is basically you said 10 years later there was finally there were public voices. Was I guess in the Australian context we say Tabal was the first on the scene that was kind of a bit more public, wrote articles, etc. Or they're other people. My third question is also in terms of career, are you talking about specifically the Muslim community? Because I guess in your book you wrote about Walid Ali. He was like sort of a translator for white people, in the sense of, there's like white anxiety in regards to I don't know, post 9/11 kind of sentiments, or even like how they view Islam, and he just became a sort of translator for white people in order to ease their anxiety. So I think you kind of alluded to that in your book, but is it sort of, are you talking about restricted to the Muslim community, or like more broadly speaking in, I don't know, in media and like other non-Muslims kind of jumping on the sort of I don't know, Islamophobic narratives? So I don't know if you there's three questions.
That's
there,
fine.
but they might be linked.
The apologetic stance is one of defense, basically, one of negation. So you try to negate the negative, and that never works. So the negating of the negative, and it's built on engagement. So let me just go through all those terms. So negating the negative, somebody comes out and says you're a terrorist, or your religion's to blame, and it's too much, it's too fanatical, it's underdeveloped, whatever. And you try to negate that. And in negating that, you say, no, we're also progressive, Islam is also peaceful, so forth. We kind of define that as apologizing for the act of terrorism. With that, I mean, some of them actually did apologize, but others didn't. They just spoke about the necessity to say this version of Islam is wrong, it's not the true. I would remember we had, I think, one of the earliest examples of incidents. Not early. I remember seeing Susan Carland on Q&A and denouncing the Taliban and saying that their version of Islam is not the true Islam, something along those lines. Miriam Vizazad as well on Insight, they're lunatics. I have problems with that. I don't think, we living in the first world get to call other Muslims heretics if we don't experience on a day-to-day level of what they're going through. And I'm not justifying or saying that the Taliban has a version of Islam that is my own or anything like that. That's not the debate. It's not a theological one. It was a constant positioning of the fact that all acts of violence, all of this is not the true Islam, and the true Islam is one of acceptance and tolerance and with the West. Now, yes, is tolerance and acceptance and dialogue all part of our deen? Of course, I'm sure it is. Is it all part of our historical past? Absolutely. But I felt like there was an erasure of the violence that we as a ummah were receiving, and that needed to be addressed. So the apologetic stuff came about centering the deen and negating the negative stereotypes and saying basically this was it's not us, it's not who we are, it's them, and they're not really us, sort of thing, right? They're imposters, they're heretics, they're lunatics, etc., etc. The negating of the negative never works. All they did was entrench in the public debate the idea that there was a link between Islam and terrorism. If you constantly say, I'm not a terrorist, you're just basically giving power to the public debate to assess whether or not you are one, assess whether or not you are telling the truth. The debate in everybody's eyes basically became, how terroristic is Islam? It's like if my daughter came up to me and said, I didn't steal a cookie because the cookie jar's empty. She kept saying, I didn't steal the cookie. Yeah, maybe I believe her, but like the debate becomes about whether or not she stole the cookie, right? And then that doesn't matter, whatever people agree. The debate in the public became about Islam's relationship to terror, not politics, not history, not US foreign policy, not the centuries of colonialism, not any of that, not the corruption in our our states, none of that. It became about the relationship between Islam and terror, and then subsequently within that frame, then we talk a little bit about history, right? But yeah, the main driver became that. So that was the apologetic stuff. As for the second question, I mentioned Tabak because I was most familiar with it. It was the first, I think it was Sydney Morning Herald. It got a significant amount of traction. But yeah, no, there was plenty. And keep in mind, back in the day, today we have a far closer relationship with Muslims in the UK and the US. Back in the day, we didn't, right? In Australia. We didn't, there was no initiative of some kind, or was there? Maybe, I don't know. But there was no real space to collect Muslim Western voices, if you will. So there was plenty of dissenters around, but not so much in the Australian public space, and not so much taken up by media. Now, partly because our peak bodies did a lot of work to exclude, erase, and sideline radical, if you will, or politically unapologetic Muslim voices, right? And I think one of the things that this Tabar's article did, it just bypassed all of that and went straight to the media. And then the Muslim leadership had to respond. Yeah, so that was, I mean, the only reason I bring that moment up, and it may not be the first moment, because I was intimate with, I remember it clearly. I think it was also in Sydney, a bunch of leaders got together at LMA and to apologize for the behavior and treatment of the protesters. Yeah, so look, we've all, well before I was born, or any of you were born, there have been Muslims who have been dissenting, who know what we know today. It's whether or not we heard them. Right? There's no one individual that captured or understood the argument before anybody else. We've inherited this right to dissent, this disobedience, this recognition of our trauma. We know this. Palestinians know this intimately. Afghanis know this intimately. Iraqis know this intimately. And we could also traverse many, many parts of the Muslim world, in Asia, Africa, the whole place, where we know how we've been treated. It's just that it was policed through power and hegemony and all the above to ensure that it doesn't enter the public space, that the public space would reward and amplify more moderate voices. As for, I think your third question was about Waleed as a translator. And if I remember correctly, you're asking me why Waleed, basically. Partly because of his success in entering the public space. I mean, it wasn't a coincidence. So let's give the man some credit. Incredibly intelligent, articulate, and does something which I think so many Muslims want to see, and so many non-Muslims want to see. He's calm. He comes across as rational. He's not yelling or screaming or pointing the finger back. And in a very meaningful way is trying to play this middle ground where we're speaking about, yes, there are grievances, however, terrorism is wrong, so forth. And then in our everyday life, when we're arguing with people or whatever, we get this kind of mediator that comes in and tries to recognize it. And we see this person as ultimately building bridges and translating hurts and pains and so forth. And I think he did that rather well. And I remember going to talks and main figures in academia and Australian media asking him questions about who's this and who's that and why has this occurred. And so we've got to give him credit. He did that well. It's a rubbish position politically because there is no two sides here. It's not, I mean, even in his book, he spoke about two sides. He spoke about people mistranslating each other, right? Through some image of a cartoon that he saw in a legal office. That establishment of there being two sides is an erasure of the violence. Him making it about the East v West as if it's on, a horizontal plane rather than a vertical one is the problem. And so that's the West wanted that. I felt like the ideological moment needed that. It created a position for somebody like him to come. And this is part of the reason why he was so celebrated and listened to. And Muslims wanted this calm, rational person who inevitably made it sound like, oh, yeah, we accept that there's flaws, but we have to look at context and so forth. And, one of the easiest things we can do is turn, sometimes it's assumed, forgive me for over talking, I'll stop here, but it's assumed that if we make something complex, then we sound more intelligent. So if I say, look, the issue in Syria is more complex than this, and if I go, Afghanistan is a very complicated situation, it looks like I'm adding value. Sometimes it's actually rather simple. Violence begets violence, dropping excessive amount of bombs and corrupting people's self-determination for your own interest creates the conditions upon which it's very, very likely you're going to get violent dissent. Arming the Taliban may come back. Sometimes it's quite simple, but this notion of complexity equals truth was something that I thought he played in. So the reason why he just popped up everywhere. He was everywhere. Anything to do with Muslims, it was Waleed. and so he became a reference point for many of us.
It took a while for that language to develop, didn't it? I referred to initially, Islam wasn't nearly as it wasn't in the media like it has been for the last 20 years since. And the Muslim responses, I remember Sheikh Hamza Yusuf's unfortunate article, I'll say, that, if you don't like it, you should go back. He even used language like that in the newspaper article. I think it was I don't know, it was a prominent broadsheet. And I remember like that's what we were looking out for, is like how do we make sense of our Islam, and how does it sit, and how does it yeah, like we knew what being Muslim was, but politically, the only recent memory we had was really us as victims, really, Bosnia and Kosovo and so on, in more recent memories. Although there was attempts by America to show that this has happened before. There was an attack at the World Trade Center before. Al Qaeda's targeted America before, and it was almost like I don't know. Seemed like it was difficult to tell whether we were building a narrative for ourselves by like looking to religion and saying, you should point fingers at yourself, or was it that we were being fed something? Because I mean, obviously, all our leaders are sincere about what their Islam and what they're trying to do here, but it just seemed like the politics was evolving in a way where at first there was like a vacuum, like you couldn't you had to actually listen out for how to make sense of this. And as soon as the moderate versus extremist, quote unquote, camps language was formed, people started taking their positions. And Walid obviously comes way later into the scene, and anybody else really. But it was like that ground was laid, and it was both religiously as well. Like the ulama started talking about al-wast, the middle way, which is an Islamic concept, to ulama and others as well, less qualified people as well, started talking about that Islam itself has a middle way, right? Started like um, uh, accommodating the political rhetoric. Um, and I remember, so like myself, I got involved in HT. Not got involved. I joined HT. Let's just be clear about that. And I remember that's what we're resisting. We're like, no, like, hang on a second. Is um, when is this a thing that the superpower with 700 different military bases around the world, which controls the financial system and lives of billions of people, all of a sudden become the victim? I mean, yes, there's this event, and I remember even then, this was probably like the early days, like not even, it was like predates memes. Um, there was this really funny one going around, which is President Bush at the cinemas, and he's got a card. It says 9/11, and then the cinema the they were saying, no, Mr. Bush, you can't use that everywhere. Right? He was trying to get into the movies for free. Um, So because that was the frustration, it's like, what the heck? Like this guy's just going to war after war. I think I'm talking about Second Gulf War now, by now, because that's when the irrationality really peaked. It was like they created this um, narrative about weapons of mass destruction, and everyone's like, wait one whole second. Like America has the most in the world, doesn't it? And doesn't the Russia have more, and every other country has more than this impoverished Middle Eastern country that's been like sanctioned for a decade. I don't know where I'm going with this, but like this is how it felt, man. Tanzim and Yassir, like for me, like it was just a confusing mess, and um, it was all about you got to be the best Muslim you are, and that was very tiring. It's like, well, what else was I gonna be, or where was my life going?
Do you have anything to add to that, Yassir?
No, I think Sadi started off with a really profound question for me. Like, we were compelled to figure out our relationship with, like, we knew how to be Muslim, but now we had to figure out how to be Muslim in this current climate. What does it mean? What is it saying to us? You kind of interpolated, called into response, called into a debate around it, and yeah, I think that pressure, that culturalizing of a question mark that hung over us, created all sorts of stress and opportunity, chaos, and order all together. And so the fact that wars were being drawn up and executed in the background, and we were seeing millions displaced, thousands killed and maimed, all added to the kind of anxiety associated with what it meant to be Muslim. Of course, then we're looking for answers, and joining Hizb ut-Tahrir became one of them. Me going back to university to understand politics became another. Us maybe receding into a quietism became a third. There was, of course, because there's a question, we have to resolve it. We have to answer it, and that is the opposite of privilege, right? Where we're now compelled to the disadvantage to spend an excessive amount of psychological, emotional, intellectual, communal energy to resolve a question mark that society has put above us.
I think. Sorry, do you want to say something? Sorry.
Were you asking me?
Yeah. Did you want to say something?
Yeah, but yeah, well, might as well. Yeah, sir. I think initially you were studying architecture at uni, and you changed. Was that? Sorry, I know it's a personal question,
No,
but too late. You was that motivate the change that you made? Obviously, like had nothing to do with architecture anymore. Motivated in part by.
absolutely, yeah. Nothing was the same. I don't know. I don't want to overstress. So there's a problem, right? One of the problems is you don't want to overstress September 11 because it really isn't a moment for developing people. Those what Fanon calls who live in the zone of non-being. Those from colonized society have experienced similar violence for a lot longer. You don't want to privilege this as a kind of the moment that shaped the century, because that is a very Eurocentric and Western American-centric interpretation of time, right? But personally, by virtue of my proximity to the West, by living here it was a moment that changed my life, and changed everything. I wasn't planning ever to do what I ended up doing. I was trying to become an architect. I wasn't very good at that attempt, but I didn't see an urgency to do it anymore. To go back to your point about the question that we're compelled to answer. I found myself reading more, watching the news more, being in conversations more, walking in parks, self-reflecting on what was going on there. And then one thing led to another. It seemed every aspiration or dream or ambition I had before that dissipated. It no longer became meaningful to me.
I wanted to also touch on, I guess, the change of government response. I think we talked about how Sadi mentioned, going to other countries in Afghanistan, etc., but also talking about the changes domestically, maybe specifically in the Australian context. So, for example, I assume at that time, I can't really comment too much about, just, after 9/11, but I guess what we see from because of ramifications of or the consequences of 9/11 is that we see heightened security. Like the obvious one is in airports, going in and out, Muslims being a bit more interrogated. To, for example, I think it would have eventually happened to like CVE. Sadi would have propped up, monitoring masjids as well and sheikhs, etc. And yeah, just having that sort of whole narrative of, look, we need to defeat these, pesky terrorists that are lurking among society, and make sure we monitor them and get to them, right? And I guess within that, ASIO was in the conversation. Within that, we heard even many stories of Muslim houses getting raided, and now I guess if you want to talk about the current context, I think the very recent one was a sort of friend, like a distant friend that I knew of because he was in the same MSA as me, was Kamal Nizamuddin, in that situation where he basically got framed and straight away he's put into like gold burn jails, like maximum kind of security prison. I guess in that sense, it's like it goes to show that how quick the law is when it comes to jailing anyone that's perhaps called quote unquote like suspected of terrorism. It's just like they can just kind of chuck them in. No, you don't need to go through any system or proceedings of sorts. It's just like, yeah, just gonna chuck him in. And he had his whole life when he had to go back to Sri Lanka, and he stayed there for a month in jail. He had his whole kind of life change because of just because of that, right? So I guess that's the state of the laws and the legal system now when it comes to someone convicted of terrorism, or just being, I guess, Muslim and brown, or any other, like, I guess, black Muslim, brown Muslim. You're just going to be, suspected in that manner, unfortunately. So it's like, I wanted to get your sort of thoughts when it comes to the changes domestically when it comes to the government's approach post 9/11 as well. I'll start with you, Yassir.
Actually, Sadi might be better for this because I remember Hizb ut-Tahrir did a really good conference talking about the ways police and policing instruments, including ASIO, ISIS, and all that, were basically harassing the community. The anti-terror legislation came slow in Australia, and Brandis, in the era of Brandis and so forth. I mean, it wasn't initial and straight away, but you're absolutely right. Like, and I'll let Sadi comment more, but we would hear horrific stories of what would seem like the overreach of the police in harassing our youth and being locked up without knowing why is one being, especially when ISIS came into the picture as well, I think. But as I said, Sadi and Hizb ut-Tahrir did a lot of work on that, and I thought their best work was on this. So maybe he can say more.
Yeah, that was, I think you're referring to the 2015 conference, which was in the context more so of the rise of ISIS, and well, just prior to to do with the Arab Spring and the increasing violence meted out on the Muslim community by the security agencies, and raids and things like that, and raiding the wrong people and raiding people because they have a plastic sword and that hysteria. And I think Hizb ut-Tahrir had a real relevance because of that really overt Islamophobia that was going on. I mean, the fact that I feel like I'm compelled to even clarify this, like, is I think, because what I'm trying to say is that obviously there were people that did wrong things, right? And the law is there for that. But I remember we put together a report of a couple of 100 pages, which was a very amateurish effort, obviously, like a private effort of various brothers and sisters just collating what's in the public domain of like outrageous things that went up, well beyond like what would make sense to any reasonable person. Like, for instance, I remember the agency, federal government agency, but it was contacting masjid and musalla shuras around the country to have representation of imams, and it was specifically trying to get it from every state and territory to a few masjid and musallas, so that it looks representative, and and it was for basically to condone some of the government quote unquote counter-violent extremist programs. And that was just, they were just emailing them out, and the way I knew is because I was part of a Musalla Shura in Canberra, and I was like, this is so bad. Like, they're not even they're not even trying to be mask it, and so that conference that we had, there was that much material that he could do it, and a lot of people came and spoke at the conference as well that were directly affected by the raids and things like this. Um, again, like for me, it's just like there's just so much. I think trauma is probably the word, like to process. That I can't even articulate like where I'm going with this. Is just like so much to talk about. Um, but that conference was us, the Muslim community speaking back. And yes, it was one of the highlights in the history of HT in Australia, probably. Um, I should mention that I've since left HT a few years ago, but um, uh, HT was one of the lone voices, really, in really pushing back. And credit where credit belongs. It was able to, um, I think, undermine the narrative around CVE, kind of violent extremism, that programs that the government had, which led to the government changing, like just doing some cosmetic changes, like um, which agency pays the money out, from being the Attorney General's department, or the police itself, whether it's AFP or whatever, to more like cultural and social programs. Um, so um, and the community actually picked up on that, like, hey, apologizing doesn't work, and what the hell are we apologizing for? Even the peak bodies, I think, after not too long ago, probably only 3 or 4 years ago, finally said, some sister in the US collated how many times Muslims have condemned terrorism, and it was like thousands of times across the Western hemisphere.
Yeah, Sister
Very,
Hera. Sorry, I just want to quickly shout out to
yeah,
Sister Hera. She's on Twitter as well.
okay,
Yeah, it went really, really viral, mashallah. And obviously, I know she doesn't ascribe to the whole condemn politics thing, but it was just kind of addressing the point that, the kind of stereotype of, oh, look, where are the Muslims condemning, whatever. And she just kind of like, all she did was just compile all of them, and it ended up being like turning out like immense amount of pages. So I just wanted to clarify that point as well.
yeah, no, thanks, bro. Yeah, and we've been on the back foot for a long, long time up until that point, and maybe only until recently. But you can tell, like, now that it's the US has pulled out of Afghanistan, at least militarily. There was like a moment, I think, where everybody felt like, from the perspective of the occupation, that's ended and that's good. But how quickly the media is turning again, and trying to rescue Afghan women again, and all of a sudden concern for Afghan women, and because that's very much similar to the early days when it was, the US was going after terrorists and liberating the Muslim women. Um, so it's endlessly suffocating, isn't it?
Yeah, I'll touch on, I guess, Afghanistan towards more to the end, because there's a lot to unpack there as well, and it's definitely like related to the broad topic. But in saying that, I also wanted to backtrack a little bit. I don't know if Yassir had anything to add to what Sadi just said now, but I'll let him do that. But I'll just ask the question as well, where it's like, I think we also missed out on talking about like Cronulla riots and what happened there, post 9/11. I don't know if it's too relevant or it's something you want to get into, but it did. I think locally it was a big thing in the media and all that sort of stuff. So I just wanted to ask if you had any thoughts to share on that whole situation of itself as well.
Yeah, it was a big thing in the media. That was about it, really. I mean, look, Sydney siders might have more to say. They'll understand the city better. But speaking to the media, it was after 4 or 5 years now of 4 years of constant saturation of the media, feeding a kind of clash of civilizations narrative, and inevitably stoking and providing permission for, let's say, most base form of racist, most obvious form to come to the surface, and then after that, then there's a little bit more See, in those years, from '05, I think even to '06, '07, '08, there was a constant attempt to, I think, curate the moderate Muslim, right? And shortly after that, we had in July, actually, I can't remember when Cronulla was, but 2005 was also the year of the London bombings. And I remember clearly because there was a shift in the narrative because the London bombers were UK born and grew up in Leeds. And one of the concerns was then that we might have terrorists who grew up here their whole life in the West and inevitably turn against us. I know it sounds strange now because it's a given, it's an assumption that you might have Muslims who are citizens of the West that may not have political loyalty to the West. That's a given. But after London and in the wake of Cronulla, there was this effort to build more of a moderate Muslim recognition and brand in order to help society deal with potentially radical fundamentalist Muslims within society. So there was a shift internalizing in, which meant there was more attempts now to make Muslims part of the solution. And that's what the legacy of Cronulla riots did, because a few people started worrying that, well, maybe this has gone a bit too far and we need to start figuring out how to avoid these clashes.
Do you think? Yeah, sorry, Sadi.
I remember Cronulla riots. Because I was living in Mandurah, like which is really far out west. Did Yassir just disappear?
Yeah, keep going. You'll be able to hear us.
Okay,
Sorry.
okay.
Yeah.
Sure. What about Alan Jones was obviously the instigator, really. Like he really flamed the tension. Apparently the story was some Lebanese youth attacked a Nazi lifeguard, but I'm not sure the truth of that. But it became soon how the Arabs are taking over the beach, and we've got to take back our country and got to take back the beach. And but then in the ensuing mayhem, they were attacking anybody of color. There was like Indians and Sikhs and all sorts of people getting beaten up with the excuse and proviso that they're taking back the beach from the Muslims and the Lebs. I remember this is just some details of what I remember, but like I don't know if this is going to inform the podcast, but there was rumors that Lakemba Mosque was going to get attacked. I remember all this youth came out to protect Lakemba, and then that just resulted in further violence. That never happened, alhamdulillah. As in the attack, no attack came, but there was a retaliation. There was youth going from the west to eastern suburbs and smashing up cars. So for us, it was a really scary time, and I remember like ever since like Alan Jones and shock jocks like that the whole concept that these people exist to 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 and they have such a big audience. Like I think Alan Jones always maintained above 1 million listeners, something ridiculous like that, and he only got removed not only recently, right? But that was his material. Like that's what he thrived on. All the like ridiculous, and people were pointing him out as an extremist, and he's been removed from his job here and there, suspended and then brought back because he makes too much money for the station, I'm guessing. But he could just get away with anything, it seemed, and I don't think that's because he's given some room for that. That room exists. We saw that in Parliament as well. Like, you get these, you had these creatures in the last few years where they were saying things like the final solution for Muslims and language like that. It's like that room always existed, it seems, and when it's in not so overtly violent language, well, it's done in more subtle ways, or it's subtle enough that we don't notice it. It's not in our face, but it's wonderful, and I say that ironically or in a sarcastic way, that um, that language, we have to make sense of. It's not, the media and other commentators who are meant to be doing, um, maybe serving the truth or whatever, are not going out of the way to delineate that. And forever the Muslim has been, since that time and probably even earlier, just that we were too young probably to know the politics. We're the live, have to push back. So yeah, I think this is, I don't know if this is traumatizing me or is this therapy, but or cathartic, but I'm struggling here, to be honest.
Yeah, so you have anything to share in regards to the point Sadi made?
No, I think no, I don't. I mean, as I said, I think those who live in Sydney, especially around Cronulla, would have a kind of more lived experience about it, especially being that you're from the area. So yeah, we in Victoria always look down at you guys in Sydney as part of the problem. So
I think branching off Crown riots, there's another interesting kind of conversation to be had when it comes to, I guess, the sense of nationalism, or sense of, I guess, the sentiments of, if you live in Australia, you have to be Aussie and whatever that means. And usually, when someone says that, it comes with an image of Anglo-Saxon wearing, I don't know, a Australia bucket hat and, I don't know, frying some sausages on the beach or something. And if you don't look like that, then are you truly authentically Aussie? But what I'm trying to get at is, like, I guess, I want to get your thoughts, Yassir, on this, in the sense of, do you find that just virtue of, even perhaps even before like 9/11, we didn't really have to be in a position, to prove that we are human, like in quotation marks, in the sense of, obviously in the Eurocentric perspective, they have a specific definition in the sense of, within society, you have to be human and you have to be like one of us to be, a good person, etc. And would you say those sentiments always sort of existed, even in, I don't know, 1980s or 1990s or whatever? Or was it heightened during maybe post 9/11, where it's like, okay, look, you have to look a certain way because we're sort of scared that, okay, look, you're Muslim, but you're following Islam, and so there's this kind of perception that you follow too much of Islam, that you might be an extremist, which means you potentially might go to, I don't know, fight in Syria or whatever.
yeah,
And like, I guess essentially, just virtue of being people of color, it's like you have to prove yourself to others, prove your humanity to others. And perhaps it was more heightened post 9/11 for, I guess, specifically on the Muslim community. Like, obviously the black community were sort of going through their own struggles in America, etc. We know that it's Muslims in the black community as well, so that there was segments of the Muslim community undergoing that. But I guess post 9/11, did it, heighten, or do we have those sort of sentiments already there before? And yeah, and also if you could just also unpack that kind of concept of having to look and talk and be a certain way, so that from the perspective of a Muslim, it's such that you are now, part of the West and you'll be accepted into the West.
Yeah, look, all the technologies that racism use, all the justifications and excuses and the targeting and the narratives in the public space and the internalizing of otherness that we have as people of color, and yeah, all of that existed of course, before September 11. September 11, all the policing techniques, all the, that were used on Muslims existed prior, targeting indigenous communities here, African American communities, in Australia, radical communities here and abroad. All of this existed. September 11 maybe invented new ways or justifications to accelerate some of the state's intrusion and the state's employment and leaning on racializing of the problem. And by racializing of the problem, it became about the cultural excesses of the terrorists. There were two Muslim, as you said, two Islamic, all the wrong versions, and so forth. So nothing that we endured was new. It may have happened in a different context and accelerated the pace and the saturation of it in media. It was every day. I don't know if I'm wrong about this, but it just felt like every day there was a story. Every single day, every aspect of the Muslim life, the entire cycle of our lives. We're having too much birth, right? You're having too many kids. Sooner or later in 2050 there'll be 51% Muslims and we'll take over the population, right? Who you're hanging out with, where you live, enclaves, what food you eat. All of a sudden halal became a pathway to terrorism, right? We were supporting terrorists. What we're studying, centers had to be built up because institutions and universities are corrupting with post-colonial, postmodern stuff. Every feature. Universities now were checked about what they could not do. Schools, kids from kindergarten all the way up to primary school, monitored about whether or not they have tendencies of radicalization. Right? Who you hang out with, who you speak to, who your friends are. Yeah. So the moment I'm in a private chat with this man about that, that's it. I know that. Or maybe it's before that even, but whatever. The point is, every part of your life is scrutinized. And all of this scrutiny exists. This technology to do so existed prior to us. Some stuff they invented, right? But most of it was old tools, old racial tools. But I do think the pace of it, the saturation of it, what was at stake, and because of at least from the West's perspective, because of the spectacular nature of September 11 in which they were attacked, that heightened an urgency for many, right, in these institutions. But yeah, nationalism became a big part of it, like the idea that if you were Australian and a citizen, then you had to be loyal to some set of values. And don't forget that, we haven't touched on this, a lot of this tied to debate around immigration and asylum seekers in Australia. And that got tied in by Howard into the debate around terrorism. We don't know what these people believe or who's coming into our borders and so forth. Yeah, man, being Muslim, the whole thing, every aspect of it, where you're from, what you do, right? And of course, what you believe, right? Of course. And there was a kind of like, part of the CVE stuff was like, it's more prevalent in the UK and Australia, but they're different. Sorry, more prevalent in the UK and America, but they're different. Australia doesn't, sometimes I wonder why Australia is so anxious about this problem. Muslims are less than 2% or 500,000 and so forth, and that's including, significant Turkish community that, again, I could be wrong about this, had a different relationship to the war on terror than, let's say, others in the community. But yeah, so look, the values, national debate, all of it's racialized. The nation state, Australia, is a racialized construct, right? So, and there's a part of that CVE stuff that was inevitably looking at what you believed before you acted, right? So, and you know what? We were implicit in that. Some of us who were quote unquote leaders were implicit in that because we constructed a version of Islam that tried to show itself familiar, having a familiarity to the Australian public. And that meant we were also judging, maybe even condemning or assigning the parts of Islam that are not familiar with Australian values as part of the problem. So one of the worst ways this happened was the employment of tasawwuf or Sufism or some type of more compatible Islam and the scapegoating and blaming of Salafis. And they used to throw this term around a lot, man, Wahhabis, whatever that meant, as part of the problem, right? And so when we did that, we were kind of stitching together the war narrative along with the West. And when we started speaking about values, we were implicit in that, because I don't think violence is just a product of values. It's a bit deeper than that.
Yeah, even that whole kind of constructing Islam in a very particular way to ease white anxieties. It's a really fascinating one where I guess it's. I think this also speaks to. I know you've a lot to say about this, like I guess political literacy even now or even back then, where it's like they have the wider society has these anxieties. It's like, how do we address them about Islam? It's like, no, we have to show them, look, Islam is peace. Look, you have to be good to your neighbor. Look, you have to, I don't know, be nice and manners is important and stuff like that. And within that conversation, it's like, no, like, Islam is more, personal, interpersonal. And these terrorists, how they kind of represent Islam is, backward and aggressive. And this is not Islam. Like, Islam is about spreading peace to your neighbors, etc. So there's kind of that rhetoric got heightened, and I even witnessed that. And it's interesting because it's like it also is manufactured in a way where it's like, look, this is the reason why Muslims are in such a state, is because they can't even follow. They get too angry now. Like if we only had to practice self-restraint, then we wouldn't be in such a situation. Like it would kind of be used to justify our own oppression as well. And within that, it erases the whole kind of concept and idea of like, jihad is just a spiritual jihad or whatever, or jihad of the nafs, and then it's kind of watering down Islam to this kind of fit the white gaze essentially, and yeah, like that became a more recurring thing. And so I want to get your thoughts on that, Yassir. Like I know you have a lot to share about all that kind of conversation of itself as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of premise of my book, about the compulsion to perform a particular type of Islam that eased white anxieties or as a response to those anxieties. Yeah, I was never on board with a lot of our leadership's narrative. I don't even call them leaders. I'm going to be like brutally honest. They were managers, man, and there's a distinct difference. They were managing a situation. I can be more sympathetic because of that attempt to manage it. But managers also connotate that there's somebody else that's leading the conversation. And like some stuff, man, like the interfaith stuff, which was fine. Like but at one level, the idea, they really did establish the idea that the part of the reason why racism exists is because of ignorance and fear. Once you do that, once you participate in that post-racial myth-making nonsense that racism is not the result of colonialism and the political structures that put into place an economy and a military and the institutions and an educational institution and all the ideological consequences of that, epistemology and what religion's the right religion and all of that. Once you ignore all of that and make racism based on an individual misapprehension and misunderstanding, like Joe doesn't know who Muhammad is and Muhammad doesn't know who Susie is and Susie doesn't know who Aisha is, and therefore we just need to get them together over, halal sandwiches and cups of teas and try on the hijab day and all that rubbish, right? Once you do that, you establish that the issue is culture and one's culture clash. And when you do that, it's just an act of erasure. It's like, I know it's not to the same extent, to the same degree, and maybe I'm being somewhat offensive, if not insensitive, to draw correlations and comparisons, but imagine trying to get white Australia to get together with Indigenous Australia and so they know each other. It's nonsense. It has nothing to do with the site of the crime or the site of the trauma. In fact, the idea that Europe, France, for instance, doesn't know Islam, doesn't know Muslims, oh my God, like what are you talking about? All right, or the fact that Israelis don't know Palestinians and Palestinians don't know Israelis, and that contact, like we need more contact, we need to recognize each other, we need to be able to sell a version of Islam and etc. in order to be able to gain or to end racism. Yeah, look, I know we speak of it as pressures and so forth, but wallahi, at the end of the day, there's a psychology involved, and a lot of these people, as I said, like it's not the case that we had leaders and then they found this problem. No, there were people in our community that saw opportunity. They saw opportunity to take up that pedestal. They wanted to be on table number one at the PM's iftar, right? They enjoyed it. They needed it and Islam and Muslim trauma became a shortcut to get that fame, that accessibility. And it was those people that I disliked the most because they had no right to use or to tap dance on Muslim death and destruction in order for personal. If they get on the microphone, you're going to speak back to the West. Okay, say something. But when they get up there, my God, they bore us. It's always, Islam is peaceful. We condemn this, and we're not like that. We're proud Australians. I love the footy. Well, I was born here. Yada yada yada, stuff like that. And then they'll. One way to measure this, look at the selfies and the photos. They're quick to take selfies and photos with these politicians, smiling. The same people that put Muslims in detention centers, the same people that sign off to illegal and immoral wars, and they get invited to our mosques for Eid talks and all the rest. Bro, the whole thing was triggering. It was terrible. It was horrible. We were being betrayed because of this pressure. And I don't have anything else to say than to suggest that it all functions. This is how racism functions. We have internal conflicts, we have lateral conflicts, we have conflicts with the state, and inevitably what happens is we will turn on each other. And the space that we have to navigate as Muslims of color, mostly, is a very difficult space. It will exhaust all of you. It will destroy your will to fight. Of course it will. It's an ugly space. It's a space of betrayal. It's a space of violence. It's a space of being let down. And it's also a space of idealism. What I mean by that very quickly is that in order to survive it, we had to construct fantasies that we were going to educate our way out of it, fantasies of establishing a khilafah, fantasies of speaking back, joining this, joining that, creating MSAs that will be robust. And when those fantasies collapsed, we collapsed with it because we thought, but that's what it does because we have no power in that sense. So to go back to the kernel of your question, yeah, man, like that pressure to wear the mask, I have sympathy with all of us if we have to play the game to survive. I don't have sympathy with those who quite clearly are not just wearing a mask to play the game. They believe in the mask. They believe in Australia. They believe in the West, and they think the problem is us, right? I have less sympathy for those people. I see them as my opponents. But if you have to go to uni, work, or whatever, and you just have to say what you have to say, I love democracy and God bless the Queen, say it, man. I don't care. You do you, right? Draw a line on those who play cricket. That's for another debate. But I got a little bit animated maybe, but it's there's a lot of scars that come out of those last 20 years. And one of the deepest scars is the way our management / leaders sought out a table with power to perhaps get the least amount of protection back for the Muslim communities.
Sadi, do you have anything to add there? And also, I wanted to pose this to Sadi because of your reading of Shaykh Abdal Murad's book as well. Would you say that there's something to add to there as well? Because I'll let you take the floor, actually.
Oh, you're gonna put me get me in trouble, bro. I'm meant to be the host, a host, not contributing to this discussion. I should have mentioned that earlier. Yeah, look, I think the reason I found the appeal in what the Sheikh has written about, and he also like just his outputs, generally speaking, over the last couple of decades. He's been around for a lot longer than that, of course, but it is very much because of me trying to make sense of myself in the post 9/11 era. I mean, that's pretty much all my adult life, isn't it? And um, because um, and this is not to like minimize his contribution, but the most of the outputs from the Mashaykh are, often end up um, exacerbating the situation. Conversations around, like, it's sort of like what, and don't want to put words in Yassir's mouth, but um, going to those iftars and um, rehashing the moderate extremist divide and things like that, and even scapegoating the Salafi or whatever it is. So Sheikh Abdul Hakim Murad, I think that's why he had initially, that's the appeal is there, because he doesn't do that nearly as much, at least. And this book he's written recently is it's very very slowly constructed. It's very he took his sweet time to put it together. It's over I think 15 years worth of essays that he's written over 15 years, that is um, put together as a book now. And some of the things he's trying to do there are very interesting. I thought, like, he's trying to create a original English but Muslim language to talk back to Islamophobia, um, um, to through stories, describe how Europe is a fiction in the way it's imagined, and the resistance from the far right now is it's its own trauma, it's its own loss of selfhood, which is nothing to do with the Muslims. It's just secularism, liberalism taking its course through the last century and more. So that's why I found appealing, and it seemed like it was it was educational, of course, and he was saying something normative about what Islam's position is in here. He says explicitly that he's extending the tradition to attend to the new um, new sphere of Islam in the West, Islam in Europe in particular, and in the context of the rise of the far right and racism and the racist state, like France and Germany, and he goes out of his way to, create this very rich picture for us of, like government policies and things like this in his book, to talk about which government is doing which political parties coming up, and so on and so forth. So that's why I really liked his that book in particular, and where the ideas, right, of, because I think that's what we're hanging out for. Like someone, like Yasser pointed out, like it's easy to like a lot have just become managers, just managing what the existing narrative, the one that's from the side of power, whereas this seemed to give power back.
Hello,
You know,
Sadi.
to Did I break up? Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you now. Sorry, you went in and
Okay.
out, but yeah, just continue. Sorry.
Okay. Yeah. This text, I felt like it gave power back, but then, um, but it's since it's become very fragile, I think, because um, as in it's moving in a direction, the discussions around it is moving in a little bit worrisome direction. The way I see it, because it seems the sorts of people that are supporting the Sheikh are those who are ironically participating in the identity politics that the Sheikh is trying to avoid himself, and is being co-opted by they're Muslims, that are just trying to be. I don't mean to sound judgmental, but they're trying to sound extra traditionalist. They're trying to sound extra authentic, and in doing that, they're actually making a caricature of Muslims. So, um, like I think the text is actually profoundly anti-racist, whereas people are, even heard it from the Sheikh himself that, um, you know, sort of disparaging, talking about critical race theory in a way that's just very loose and like not very, it seemed like very much like informed by the people that are responding to it, the sorts of people that are responding to it, in the not very productive way, and that's not to take away from the merit of the book or the Sheikh, with all due respect. But yeah, I think I found appeal in it because of, it's so unique. I think we're holding out for the ulama to tell us these sorts of things, and he is in his book is very critical of our existing culture in the West of Muslims. He calls the masajid race temples, right? As in they're divided amongst nationalistic or other sectarian lines, and he paints a picture of how.
So I have a point on that, right? I don't know if Yassir is listening, but like, wouldn't you say though, like, by the virtue of, for example, immigrant Muslims, like first generation coming to the West, they naturally didn't feel a part of wider society, so then they were sort of put in a position to have that kind of situation. So it's not necessarily like, we should be a bit, I don't know if like the tone of it may be disparaging or not, but there's that kind of excuses that can be leveled out for such communities in that kind of situation. So
I want to comment on that before. Sorry, yes, to still. No, the Sheikh gives no room for that. He says that in Islam inherently doesn't, asks you to be at home wherever you are. Allah has made the entire earth a masjid, and the early Muslims that left the Arabian Peninsula for Iraq and Persia and Africa and whatnot, their attitude wasn't to alter their Islam to fit the power. Even when the Muslims went to Ethiopia as refugees, their famous stance was that we were going to speak the truth. When the Sahaba affronted the Negus' court, and the Qurayshi delegation came and tried to corner them by saying, "Hey, Negus, do you know what they say about Jesus, alayhi salam?" And they spoke the truth. They stood their ground. So the Sheikh would argue back that if you think that being this way is the Islamic thing, or that's a sufficient excuse, of course, not that you shouldn't find ways of looking after your safety and well-being, and I think even that is well within Islamic, within the religion itself, it's fine, right? But to have really poor politics, especially in the West, where you didn't, like people went out of the way to make careers out of these things, for power, or I mean petty power, like masjid politics, and look, this is my masjid, and like this is a set in line. They didn't need to, and the Sheikh points out very eloquently of early Muslims in Britain, converts and all, who were trying to have a indigenous expression of Islam. So he would really not give
I'll
room
stop
for
you
that.
there for quickly, because I just want to get Yassir's
done
thoughts
anyway.
on. I want to get Yassir's thought, because you touched on a very like interesting discussion in of itself, where I see like maybe I don't know if to call them traditionalists or not, versus the more maybe activists have a different kind of take on that kind of how you articulate things. I don't know if Yassir is on.
Well,
but,
I haven't read the work, so I don't want to.
But just specifically what like Sadi has mentioned
I
as
disagree.
well, because there's a lot to unpack it.
I disagree with one thing. The way Sadi at least is framing it, I don't know if this is, again, this is where the conversation's taking us. It sounds like the burden of, I think what you asked and what Sandy responded are two different things. You're speaking about what social, cultural issues compel Muslims, if you will, or make it easier for Muslims to, create their own mosques around their own ethnic identity. First of all, I think the use of race, was it race temples or race, whatever, it's a bit scandalous. It's a bit sensationalist, right? I don't think if you, no one's going to say if predominantly white church that's made up of Germans or Scandinavians or whatever is an articulation of anything. It's just their community, right? So I think if Muslims are, if it's a Bengali mosque or a Somali mosque or an Egyptian mosque, then that's not race. I don't know what that means, but it doesn't seem much. Islam lives in different contexts and people come in different ways and carry with them different cultural orientations, and gathering together in and of itself is not a problem. Your question was, I think, asking, is the West, we have to pull our resources, we have to navigate certain things, we maybe come from a more collectivist idea, share languages, it's not our land in the sense of when we initially arrive, or in sense of familiarity, in sense, but also because of the racism, right? So I think just reducing all of that to saying, well, Muslims should have a choice of coming in here and expanding and making it their home. I don't think it's as simple as saying it's a choice, or as simple as saying, yeah, make it your home. You're gonna have obstacles. I think understanding those obstacles is important. Understanding the reasons why those obstacles occur, including the war on terror, right? It almost sounds like the description of the West is like as this open meadow of opportunity and possibility if you put your mind to it. That's categorically inaccurate. There are possibilities. Don't get me wrong. I'm not denying agency or saying that we're always going to be subjected to the margins. No, there are possibilities, but there's inertia, there's gravity, there's a compulsion, there's a pressure that makes it harder for those possibilities to come to fruition for some over others. And understanding that doesn't make you more provisional or backward in your thinking, or you've neglected your deen or anything. I'm not sure he's saying that. I'm not saying he is saying that, but I do think we have to be careful because we're racializing opportunity here. We're saying that there's something that you should be able to come here, have the right mindset, and just like the early converts, and make it your home. That sounds wonderful. It's just not accurate, right? For all sorts of reasons. So I don't know if that's where the conversation's at, or what the Shaykh is saying. But no, I don't enjoy these parts of the debate, because I think there is a kind of attempt to create a neoliberal mantra, which is it's all your responsibility, into a theological mandate, a divine kind of like order of taking responsibility for your life, which is fine, but that does not stop us from being astute readers of power and context. It doesn't stop anything. So we can have both, but recognize also that communities that come from war-torn places, communities that come from struggle, communities that come from the cultures that have been subjugated to various different violences are going to have different obstacles. And gathering together in your own mosque and creating your own safe space, for the lack of a better term, to call that a race temple? I don't know, it seems a little bit sensationalist. I don't know.
Because isn't the also, like, for example, just one kind of example that springs to mind, perhaps certain even communities, for example, like I've only spoken to others about this, like obviously I don't speak from experience, but like I guess the black community doesn't feel welcomed into another specific mosque that's more Arab dominated, so by virtue, like they have to kind of in reaction to that, they have to build their own sort of spaces and communities in that. So I guess I don't know, like Sadi, maybe you could articulate perhaps what you think maybe the Sheikh was talking about in that sense, but I don't know, there's a lot of obstacles to encounter, and there's ways of navigating it. Maybe we should be, I don't know, a bit more empathetic in that kind of discussion of itself as well.
Yeah, I don't want to be sitting here defending the book as such, bro, but it's, I guess, just let's see how it's read. Furthermore, like in a lot of circles are really celebrating it, and there's a lot of pushback by and I know, and I should make a special note by the black community, because the book, a central thesis in the book is that the right at the far right, the racists are actually just this is going to sound horrible, but are just traumatized people um, who are just mourning the loss of heritage and tradition, and we Muslims can go in and feel that because Ishmael also belongs in Europe because of Ishmael is part of the story of the Abrahamic faiths and so on. So I really like one of the points that Yasser made, that is this. I mean, he's asking a question. He's not concluding that maybe this seems maybe what if this is and with no malice intended by the Shaykh or anything, but a way of rehabilitating um, I don't know if he was saying this, but like a kind of moderate politics within a theological framework, and then putting the burden on the Muslims um, to make sense of to do better, to be more um, to actually own the problem in a way as if it's like they have that agency. And the response from the black community is I think very telling, that they're like, hey, hang on a second, hang on a second, you know, if it was that easy, or if it was that um, if this is all it is, we just need to uh, reconstitute our language or come up with different kind of storytelling to counter narratives and so forth. Um, well, that's what they've been doing. That is CRT, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean,
So
it's
yeah, but at the same time, he critiques CRT and he says that um, that's identity politics or something like that. So it's
okay.
very
Okay, so
confusing.
on that makes that makes whatever people okay. So whatever people think identity politics is often the caricature of, let's say, the conservatives or the right-leaning politics caricature of identity politics. One of the biggest ironies, look, identity politics only contrasts against a belief in the universality of liberalism, right? Identity politics is born out of the failure of liberalism to be true to its capital T truth and true to its universality. Identity politics is born in a Western context upon which we recognize that the law, when it says we are all citizens before the law, does not apply to certain bodies, does not apply to black folk, does not apply to women, does not apply to indigenous. And so therefore, we need to construct a politics that is specific to the conditions of what it may mean to be black or indigenous in this context, because the universality of liberalism is actually, historically or otherwise, built for white bodies, white society. So identity politics is a response to the failures of liberalism. So when I hear Muslims complaining about identity politics, I'm really confused. I'm like, are they believers in the capital T truths of liberalism? Or are they saying, oh, wow, we're all identity now. We don't have any universality. Which universality? Because when Muslims are talking about living in the West and recognizing that we need to bring back axioms from our deen, bring back our truths from our tradition, that by the definition of identity politics is identity politics, because we are grounding our need to create a politics on our own truths, not liberalisms, on our own experiences, not liberalisms, on our own historical, institutional, and academic or intellectual legacy, which is not liberalism. So the hysteria that's come about what identity politics means is partly by the marketing of the far right on social media and so forth, that we are now slowly descending into this anarchical archipelagos of different identities, and nobody can be anything, and we no longer believe in truths and critical race theory and feminism and all of this as part of a postmodern trend where my truth is my truth and there's no. It is a complete mischaracterization, complete misapprehension. And it is not a coincidence that we find yet another, forgive me for saying it, but it needs to be said, yet another white male upset that there are other sources of politics that are coming to disrupt the liberal space and its claim to universality. Now, what role Islam plays in that is a different question. I don't think if you're arguing against liberalism that means by as a consequence, you've forsaken the universality of your own deen. That's an illogicality. I can question liberalism's universality without questioning my own. But yeah, I don't know. I feel like the conversation, which has less to do with September 11 now, has got to the point where, and it may have to do with the resistances and the culture September 11 created, of the war on terror, has more to do with how where the burden of responsibility should lie on mobilizing us towards a better place. And I'll just conclude on this point. There is no debate between agency and structure. It shouldn't be that. It shouldn't be like, how much agency should we have? Is it us? Is it the system? That's silly. It's all about our agency, but we have to understand our agency within a structure. We have to recognize how to move within a structure. It shouldn't just be like, is it all on our shoulders? Do we have all the power to liberate ourselves? Of course you have the power to liberate yourself. Do what you have to do, and tawakkal Allah, it's up to God. But at the same time, that you acting out your agency is you reading society. You reading how racialized it is. That is your agency. So the binary of like, if I blame the West for having racism, therefore I'm not taking responsibility, or I'm not recognizing that it's always happened, and that is another conservative, right-leaning mythology that has been used to stigmatize any resistance, predominantly resistance that are born out of minority groups, as them not having the thing that Europe has always had, a strong belief in its own agency and mobility. Again, mythology. And we should try to question it and resist it as much as we possibly can. Without saying anything about the Shaykh, because I haven't really read the work, but these tropes that have been floating around, they're bothersome.
And that was thoughts that I've been thinking, and then mashallah, like, Yassir just kind of, really articulate better than I could ever. Because honestly, I think the Shaykh, look, I've really watched a lot of his content recently, because he's actually talked about quite a bit. Like, usually most interviews that he goes on nowadays is, kind of talking about it, aspects about his book, etc. Like, I forgot the recent one, I forgot which podcast it was, but he made the point that I might misquote this here, but it was more to the point that, like, look at these kind of people, like he might have been referring to like activists that are studying from Western universities, they're just as Western. And then the whole episode, majority of the episode, he's talking about how influential Rene Guénon was on him. So I felt like, what's kind of going on. It sounded like exactly like what you just articulated, Yassir, about, how there's these kind of tropes of what he means to be, I don't know, feminist or critical race theorist, etc. And intertwining that with kind of identity politics and kind of pointing the finger at that and saying that's the problem, right? It's something that, because I obviously, like a lot of people I've seen, very have, visceral reactions in terms of what the Shaykh says at times. And I guess I can understand and empathize as well, but at the same time, it does hurt a lot in some ways, because it's like, I also respect the Shaykh in ways as well. So, but I think you've kind of broke it down. So, did you have anything extra to add as well in that sense?
No. I don't know what I could. I just, I'm just concerned that the text has, again, with due respect to the Shaykh, but the text itself, I think, has a lot of value. But what it's being made into, and the responses that are the trajectory is taking, the responses are, and especially his own commentary after that. Yeah, I don't know, because he says that his text is descriptive. It's actually not making an Islamic point in terms of fiqh. And I was really shocked when I heard him say that, because it seems like in the text he's doing very much that. Like 3 of the chapters are about ayat from the Quran, using which he says that what our response should be, which I was, initially I took that as a normative Islamic position. Like, this is how you shall be Muslim in Europe, and I mean that in a serious sense. There was that authoritative tone he was using, hadith and Quran, to show like, our response should be not one of tanfir. It shouldn't be one of it should be responds to that which is goodly. And he uses all this. He builds up this case for a better response. And like he says that Islamism is a modern phenomena, and we should avoid that. And there's the Mac world, and then there's Mac jihad. He critiques. It seems like certain things he says these need to be dismantled, and these are things we need to build up. But then he goes on to say after the book, obviously in interviews and things, that it's a descriptive thing, not a normative thing. So.
Yeah, so a few thoughts as well, and I want to chuck it back the mic to Yassir because this conversation for me, this is a hot topic at times within certain circles, and it's for me kind of like navigating, making sense of it. Like on one side, I ascribe to kind of the works, critical race theorists, etc., feminists, etc. But at the same time, there's this Shaykh and there's other people that are in the community writing these books and trying to bring the Islamic so-called epistemology to the to the fore when it comes to these political discussions. So like even Yassir, you're talking about reaction, like identity politics of in regards to that. Like I think I mentioned in the last episode we did together, I guess in its context, like for example, I talked about humanism and reaction of humanism to Christendom in the sense of, look, there was this kind of strict way of living when it comes to Christendom in that time, and then naturally what followed was humanism was the reaction because people felt in a certain corner where they couldn't really explore the truth, etc. And so it's not like as a Muslim reading that I was like, yeah, sure, there's elements of humanism that I disagree for sure when it comes to my Islamic faith and identity. But in saying that, you can respect the project that came out of it, because obviously I don't ascribe to that strict Christendom way of living in of itself, right? And the way it was like made out to be in terms of, I don't know, like texts being open to the public and like Christian texts. And so humanists were an attempt to have access to knowledge and really learn and inquire, right? And within that conversation, obviously there's going to be times where, as I just said, like there might be things that might go against Islam, but that doesn't necessarily mean, hey, look, I hate humanism, etc. Which is ironic, by the way. I want to mention this, like Zaytuna College actually used the trivium and the quadrivium kind of method, which is actually from the humanist. So it's a bit ironic where it's like, I don't know, you can kind of critique that. It's like, why, if it's like really, I don't know, kufr or whatever, because some ways of investigating is like they think, truth is like in all sources in that sense. But, I guess it's ironic that even like Zaytuna College are kind of using some ideas from the kind of humanist movement. But anyways, that's a different discussion. But yeah, like what I'm trying to get to the point is like the conversation is nuanced, right? The conversation is nuanced. And like, I guess now taking it back to the current context now, when it comes to like, from what I gather, what I've listened, and listeners can feel free to critique me, all that. But Sheikh Abdul Murad ascribes to being more on the anti-feminist camp. I don't know if that's probably the right way to kind of put it, but when you kind of take on board those his positions, it seems very like conservative, right wing. Preserve the West in some ways, the structures of the West, and I think it is problematic in the lot, because it's almost like I don't know. There's the nuance is sort of left, and the works of these feminists have a lot of value. Works of critical race theorists, etc., have a lot of value. And yeah, so it's a lot more nuanced, and I don't know. I didn't feel like Sheikh Abdul Hakim kind of touches on that kind of level. It becomes a bit more reductionist. But anyway, so that's kind of my thought. Sorry, Yassir, did you have any thoughts to add in regards to what I said, or maybe if you disagree with me, but it's just me kind of making sense with it all.
No, I mean, look, yeah, no, I can understand what you're saying. I'm less, I can't make sense of the reason why we're so entrenched in the cultural wars as Muslims within the West. Because the way I read the cultural wars, it's about the Western public space and the Western public state, and so the Western state, and what's at stake there and what it constitutes, and an ongoing, forever, a meaningful debate about the universality of the human and humanism. How representative, legally and historically and otherwise, is it to different types of peoples, and with globalization and the world that we're building today, we find ourselves in proximity, not just physically, but also culturally and theologically and otherwise. And is the liberal state capable of recognizing and having a space where meaningful differences can coexist? So the cultural wars are not really our war, right? But we're invested in it. And sometimes I listen to Muslims debating this, and it seems like they're fighting for the future of the West, which is fine if that's your political project. Say that out loud, but you make it sound like you're fighting for the future of Islam, and that's where I get confused, because the two projects aren't the same, right? So yeah, that's any comment I want to make. But a curiosity to why we're so entrenched and involved in this.
Do you have like 5 minutes? I don't know if you have a bit of time, but I just wanted to touch on, I guess, Afghanistan a bit more, because I think that's like a recent thing that we can kind of unpack very quickly and then wrap up. I don't know how's the time looking for you, Yassir?
Yeah, sure.
Yep. How many minutes you got? Sorry, just so I have an idea, and I'll keep in that time frame.
Let's do it.
All right, Bismillah. But okay, so I really enjoyed that last conversation. There's a lot to unpack there, but I guess also like what's really important, and because it's very recent, is because of what happened in Afghanistan, where essentially Taliban took control, and as a result, we saw a lot of interesting kind of conversations follow of that. And I can only speak from my sort of personal experience, where any sort of so firstly, I think there's like many different little camps. Like there'll be one of like, I don't know, like, oh yeah, I hate what the Americans did in Afghanistan, but I hate the Taliban as well because they're all terrorists, whatever. There's the other camp of, oh look, American imperialism was horrible and they did many atrocities, but look, Taliban aren't as bad as they are. They're just fighting the oppressors and came into the land, etc. And they're the locals, etc. So they're in power now. And I guess there's other groups where there's like a lot of kind of Islamophobia, in the sense of, oh no, you got to protect the women. Taliban equals Sharia equals bad, and oh my gosh, like I don't know, pray for Afghanistan, etc. Obviously, we should, because they've gone through a lot of suffering in the general sense. But I guess the sentiments seem to be heightened even more only when like Taliban came into power, which is, I think, problematic as well, right? In a lot of ways. And so there's interesting kind of thought, and unfortunately, like with me, I don't know if listeners were following my Instagram page, but I went like hard, and only because on my stories, like I had like, I don't know, 30 or 40 stories I posted up every day. I'd post different videos, I'd upload them, ton of like, because in my circles, I saw a recurring theme that it's almost like, I don't know, white mask Muslim skins or whatever, like in the sense of they were exhibiting kind of Islamophobic narrative, just whole Taliban's evil, this is chaos. And it's almost like they see their own sort of people in a way, or even Sharia in a way, where it's like scary. They're scared themselves, right? And I guess a lot of that was like problematic, and so I tried to dispel those ideas, and I tried to do it to the best of my ability. Not because I'm trying to act like a savior, but it's just like in my circles, it was actually absent, and I was actually like concerned, right? Because like the first day when that happened, I'm like, didn't post anything. I'm just like, but no one's actually, I'm seeing all this misinformation. If anything, it's all more Islamophobic narratives that I'm seeing. And that was like making me, I experienced like proper anxiety. It's like, what's the conversation as in our community? Because, we talked about 9/11 and the discussion, it got a little bit better maybe 10 years later. But when I'm seeing all this, it's like, this is horrible. Like, people are like jumping on the BLM sort of situation, mashallah, it was good to see. But then it's like, the politics is like, it doesn't work. Like there's kind of, I don't know, I had to self-reflect in that way. It's like, they're jumping on that cause, talking about, government bad, etc. But then in this case, it's like, I don't know, like it seemed like contradictions in many ways. So it's like, so I was saying a lot because that was like a tumultuous time in many ways for me personally. I had to experience a lot but what was happening. But I just wanted to get your thoughts as well, Yassir, in this situation that panned out with the whole Afghanistan situation.
Yeah, I think it's really important that we as Muslims be part of that conversation, talk about it, but I also think it's as important that we listen to Afghani voices here and abroad who have both, and not any just Afghan, the conversations. I can't handle going on Clubhouse or elsewhere and somebody saying, my Afghani friend said, right? So it's about listening to Afghanis conversing and understanding the situation, and those who have spent significant amount of time studying and recognizing and knowing. I think it's important, as I said, for all of us to show urgency and consideration and be part of a conversation, what we can do to, even if it's the smallest thing as on Insta or tweeting or whatever. But we should be led in that conversation. So for me, my instinct initially was to read the right people, to listen to what's going on. I know, as probably all of us do, we have in our own circles people who have family there, right? Friends or relatives, friends that we have here who have relatives there. So I, in everything that I've received from listening to those voices, it's nothing like what I'm receiving from the media or the hot takes that we find in the community. There is hope and aspiration, and there's heartbreak and concern and fear and so forth, and it's a little bit more complex. There's so much more to the debate than whether or not the Taliban is or is not radical fundamentalists or terrorists. Once I hear that debate, and it's only about that, I worry that it's not going to go so far. So let's say the Taliban is bad, whatever, and then what? What else do we know? What else can we do? And I worry, and maybe this is what the Shaykh and others mean by identity politics. I don't know, because maybe I'm using the term differently. And then it just becomes a little bit tribal about whose side you're on and how you whistle out set phrases and so forth. So I think what's in our hands are two things. One is to show the type of necessary ethics in providing a radical way of listening, not just talking. And that is privileging the right voices, the voices on the ground. The voices have a lot to stake. The voices who have earned the right to speak, but not just those voices in conversations with others, including the ones they oppose. That's what we have. And then hopefully imbuing the public discussion and debate with that said nuance and ethics, rather than being useful idiots to those who want to trivialize this and make it about a good or bad Taliban debate. What I can say about my own position around politics, I always tend to read this stuff as a result of, violence being normalized in certain parts of the world, in certain zones of the world. It's almost expected. My heart breaks for the fact that, yet again, whatever attempts to build nations have to restart in the Muslim world, and to see the violence so bluntly being played out is terrible. And I also dislike immensely the American posturing about their supposed humanitarian project, and listening to certain voices that speak about as if this is all about whether the troops should be there or not there, echoing Biden's nonsense that we tried, we armed them, we trained them, we spent this amount of money, as if it was nothing more than American goodwill that met its limits and stubborn, violent Afghani people. So yeah, there's our job in this thing, even my job in being asked to comment, is to say back, we have to learn how to listen, and that's a skill that I think unfortunately is becoming less and less appreciated in social media as that platform and the loudest voices.
Even I guess I definitely agree in the sense of we should look to the right voices in Afghani people who are on the ground, etc., to articulate the situation that's on the ground, etc. But even in that conversation, because it was good that you brought up like identity politics again, in the sense of like, even for me, it's not like I could just go to any sort of Afghanistani reporter in this sense, because some of them are like Islamophobes as well, right? And kind of secular in their outlook. Look, I don't want to speak in behalf of like any people and stuff, like, because it was interesting, like, I guess the narrative like Taliban equals evil, and I was like talking to all these like Afghani people that I know that is like they're all pro Taliban, so it's like, where's that like kind of media push where in the sense of like speaking, I don't know, I feel like the media sort of at times spoken in behalf of what they deem to be I don't know, the Afghani people in some ways, and I found that really interesting. It's like I'm going to the people kind of who I know and stuff, and they're just like, you know, having a different kind of opinion, but in the sense of like what we see in the media, it's like totally different. And even some, I guess, Afghani particular reporters, as I said, with a more maybe secular, you know, liberal outlook, etc. It's like they'll only prop them up, if that makes sense. Have you found that to be a situation to navigate as well?
Absolutely. Just to clarify, I don't think anyone should just be, I'm going to listen to this one Afghan voice or this two Afghan. I think I was trying to stress that you want to listen to their conversation, right? You want to listen to those who have the right to participate in that conversation. And that conversation will have multiple positions, right? I don't think it's important for us to sit there and listen, for instance, Western American Muslims who have, yes, a relationship to the issue, but nowhere near as much at stake, and their discussion over the Taliban. That is, you can do that if you want, but I think as a learning exercise, it's important to listen to types of conversation. And alhamdulillah, we have that ability. It's not hard these days, right, to try to find and bypass the mainstream media. And the fact that you have suspicion that certain voices are being propped up, that's part of radical listening. Are these voices? You listen to them, and then you listen to another voice. You listen to the ground, and there's no. I mean, put it this way. Let's use it again. Nowhere near a similar situation, but let's say somebody wanted to understand the condition of Australian Muslims, and they bumped into, I don't know, Jamal Arifi or something, and listen to them only. Yeah, that wouldn't do justice to anything. Nor would it do justice if they just listened to, I don't know, me and no one else. That wouldn't do justice. What would do justice, I think, to the understanding the condition is recognizing the conflicts, the debates, the conversation, the different actors, and that will give us a better sense of the debate, how we argue with one another, how we debate one another, and the reasons for it. And so, it's not about following one Twitter account. I'm not saying you're saying that, or just trying to create a confirmation bias, but it's trying to find out as much as possible about that whole conversation. And mainstream media is probably not designed for that. This requires hours, days, weeks of investment. Media hasn't got the time to devote all of that to one issue. So that's something we can do as Muslims, to learn, to expand our circles and figure out how to listen before we talk. And I'm going to say something that's probably provocative and half true, half joking. We also have to be careful that we don't learn from America. Americans are loud, man. They just always talk. This could be a generalization, but they're always marketing, they're always promoting their position, they're always, maybe it's an Australian thing as well, maybe it's the narcissism implicit in modern liberal, I don't know, maybe it's ego nafs, I don't know, maybe I'm inaccurate in blaming and pointing a finger at Americans, maybe it's everywhere. Maybe the only reason we can see Americans is because they're most successful, because of hegemony, the most obvious. But we have to be careful to celebrate opinions, because it's loud and there and accessible. Otherwise, then we're falling into the trap of tying power to truth. The louder your voice, which is almost always a result of privilege, almost always, not universal law, right? So it's similar. We're listening to some people because we have access to them, and ignoring maybe thousands on the ground whose voices are far more important. And we have to learn how to flip that on its head. And that's what I will say, rather than speak about the details of it. But I will say this: there can be no explanation of what's going on in Afghanistan without the war on terror and everything that preceded it. There can be no understanding of the conflict or the violence without looking at the way Afghanistan for three major geopolitical actors has been has been a strategic place for their own political interests, and the people who have suffered first and foremost are those who were identified and identify as Afghans.
I wanted to ask as well, when it comes to like specifically Islamophobia, how did you, when it comes to the situations, because maybe necessarily you don't have to like expand on specific events that occurred, but it's more so the conversations that you saw yourself, could be even in like your own sort of local circles or abroad, etc. When it comes to specifically Islamophobia within the conversation of what sort of panned out in regards to the events in Afghanistan, like what did you witness yourself, and mostly, and what issues have you seen yourself when it comes to those sort of conversations as well?
Well, if we define Islamophobia as a fundamental force that tries to erase Muslims, including erase our full capacity to do our Islam, then not only is Islamophobia played out in the attempt to erase Afghanis by some people of Earth, like US soldiers shooting at people fleeing the airport, right, for no real reason other than their own security. Maybe erasing from global consciousness the fact that this matters maybe a lot more than a lot more people are having their lives disrupted than, say, the type of attention the Paris bombing got. There's the actual Islamophobic violence being enacted and the way it's represented. And then there's the erasure of voices that we need to hear. And then there's the erasure of understanding in history. I mean, I think it was Salman Saeed who once, in an interview, I remember, said, how ridiculous would it be for us to reduce, say, the Second World War to a conflict between Brits and Germans because they had two different types of Protestantism or different types of Christianity. You wouldn't do that. Or France and Germany was a result that one was Catholic and one wasn't. I mean, you intuitively know World War II was far more complicated than that. And yet when we speak about the Muslim world, we kind of tend to fall into these traps of speaking about it's sectarian violence, it's two different types of tribes, and it's religion versus secularism. And that's another type of Islamophobia. And even when we speak about solutions, and a lot of my time, I mean, I'm really here for this, but a lot of the time it's like, what's the solution? And Islam gets erased from the possibilities of solution because Islam gets reduced back to things that have happened in the past. And next thing you know, you're debating about the Mughal Empire or the Umayyads or the Ottomans and so forth, because that has to be a natural manifestation. So Islam is always historical, never a possibility. Yeah, all Islamophobia is everywhere, man. It's always this. It's very rare that you'll have a conversation about Afghanistan in the West, and big parts of it won't be subjectively Islamophobia or objectively Islamophobic, right? So, but we don't have to worry about that. You don't have to worry about that. Your, as I said, obligation is to see it, not necessarily oppose it, because it's always going to be it. It's always going to be there. So just see it and then navigate in your own way, ways to be able to do justice by those who need it.
Those those are really good insights, especially like even the idea of I guess Taliban coming in and implementing Sharia, and it was a really good point about the possibility of it. I guess people would jump to instances in the past where it's like Sharia went bad or something to that effect, and you have also other camps that are trying to put like a sort of secular interpretation as the most ideal option naturally, whereas like Islam as a polity or of sorts is not even in the conversation at all, and that's sort of what I saw and witnessed as well, because naturally, I don't know, it's like Islam equals Sharia equals look at the women, I don't know, like they self-reflection, and not to say that like I dismiss that conversation, because obviously there might be feminists that have that concerning of itself. But I guess my point is like, why are you jumping to that specific issue like straight away? If it's like, oh, why the women? I guess like there's a sort of intention or a presupposition like Sharia equals like women being oppressed, etc. Where I guess as Muslims, and if we were to see the Sharia in action, like that's definitely not something we would want in that sense, right? I guess so. It's like that possibility is not entertained at all. So you might disagree with me or not, but I don't know if you had anything to add to what I just said as well. But yeah,
no, I appreciate where you're at with this, and I think it's a sign that we're developing the right trust and the right mistrust at different points in the conversation, and that may be a legacy of September 11 as well, and all that's happened before, because we've learned to have the right temperament in regards to different types of. I swear that was an accident. Right temperament with respect to trust in different moments. Yeah.
Definitely. And did you have any you probably need to head off now, but did you have anything you wanted to touch on, like maybe we didn't really talk about in terms of post 9/11 and what happened there, or anything else? Is there anything you wanted to mention, or you got it out of your chest?
Yeah, I think so.
We're all good. Inshallah.
Thank you for the opportunity to chat.
All right, I'll wrap it up there. So for our listeners, thank you for giving us your attention. If you have any questions or queries, feel free to email us at info@boysinthecave.com. You can follow us on Facebook. We've got Twitter, Instagram. Inshallah, give us a follow there. Mashallah, alhamdulillah, like a lot of people are reaching out, sharing the kind words and messages about their opinions and thoughts. Keep it coming, inshallah. Even like criticism, as long as it comes from it's not like, I guess you can be hostile if you want, but at the end of the day, we appreciate everyone kind of giving their thoughts and feedbacks, inshallah. So from our special guests, Yassir Morsi, my co-host Sadi, and myself, we wish you all the best. This is Tanzim signing off. Assalamu alaikum.